You've got 30 days to pack up and leave. This house isn't yours anymore." The words hit me like a slap across the face. Declan's sneering smirk made my stomach churn as he shoved the bogus eviction notice into my hands. My mind raced, but Marcus looked utterly shell-shocked beside me. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded, hands trembling with the crumpled papers. Elise stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto me. "It's all there in black and white, Celia. This property legally belongs to us now, thanks to your dear Aunt Lydia." My heart plummeted. Aunt Lydia? How could she do this to her own family? A wave of dread washed over me as the gravity of the situation sank in. "You're bluffing," Marcus spoke up, his voice strained. "This is our home. We've worked tirelessly, paid every bill on time for years." Declan's laughter was like nails on a chalkboard. Well, the teacher has some fight in him after all, but I'm afraid the paperwork doesn't lie. Lydia signed everything over to us fair and square." My mind raced as I studied the documents, my business instinct searching for any shred of legitimacy. A bead of sweat trickled down my back. This couldn't be happening. Not after all the sacrifices Marcus and I had made to build this life. "Why are you doing this?" The words tumbled out, edged with desperation. Elise's smile was almost pitying. "Because we can, dear Celia. This town belongs to us, and anyone who doesn't fall in line will be crushed like insects." My fists clenched at my sides. After years of hard work, raising the funds to open my cafe, and Marcus dedicating himself to shaping young minds, everything was crumbling beneath our feet because of these two vipers. But as I glanced at Marcus, I could see the defiant glint in his eye, the same look that had given me strength through every uphill battle we'd faced. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. I straightened my spine, staring Declan and Elise down with a renewed sense of determination. 30 days? So be it. But by the time that clock runs out, the whole town will know what kind of snakes you truly are. Elise's smirk faltered, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Declan opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. "Get out of our home, and I'll see you both in court. The fight has only just begun." Those vultures wanted war? They would get one, because there was no way I would let them destroy everything Marcus and I had built without a fight. This was our life, our dream, and I would protect it with every fiber of my being. The nerve of Declan and Elise, thinking they could just waltz in and steal our home out from under us. As if the life Marcus and I had built together meant nothing to those vipers. I simmered as I drove to the cafe, Marcus beside me, stewing in his own rage. We hadn't said much since that fateful confrontation. What could we say? Our foundations were crumbling thanks to my aunt's betrayal. Sweet Lydia, always struggling to make ends meet, her financial desperation finally exploited. I could clearly picture Declan spinning his web, promising riches if she'd just sign over her claim to the property. Easy as that, the snakes had slithered their way in. "Those sons of bitches," Marcus finally grumbled, breaking the silence. "After everything we've sacrificed to make a good life here." "I know." The words caught in my throat. This was our first real home, the dream we spent years clawing towards. No more renting, no more scraping by paycheck to paycheck. We could finally start building wealth, put down roots. All those late nights spent crunching numbers, the second jobs we took on to boost our down payment. The sweat equity poured into the fixer-upper and into our cozy sanctuary. Memories flooded over me, painting the nursery, making plans to start a family of our own. "We can't let them take this from us, Celia." I reached across, squeezing Marcus's hand. "We won't. Those snakes picked the wrong family to slither into." The cafe was my pride and joy, allowing me to share the flavors of my childhood with the community. Years of tireless hustle, getting up at dawn to prep and bake. I imagined the look on Declan's smug face as he devised some twisted scheme to undermine my success. But Marcus was the real prize in their sights. His passionate teaching, inspiring the youth who would one day lead this town. Of course, those creeps saw him as a threat, being part of the system that could expose their misdeeds. The school's parking lot was a ghost town, classes dismissed for the summer. I steered towards the loading dock, Marcus falling in step as we headed for the kitchen's rear entrance. I stopped dead in my tracks at the horrific stench practically burning my nostrils. Marcus grabbed my arm, his face twisted with revulsion as we slowly rounded the corner. Mounds of rotting food and God knew what covered the entire lot, putrescence oozing from overflowing dumpsters haphazardly strewn about in a sea of swarming flies. The sight and smell were overwhelming, utterly apocalyptic. That's when I spotted it, a thick brown streak of refuse painting the side of my pristine stainless steel kitchen. The vile culprits had sent their message, loud and clear. I fought back the bile rising in my throat. Those bastards had drawn first blood, defiling my sanctuary. But if they thought this revolting ploy would make me buckle, they were dead wrong. This meant war, and they had no idea the hell I was prepared to unleash. The cafe was in shambles. Declan and Elise's calling card of rancid filth had seeped into every nook and cranny, leaving a gut-churning reek that no amount of bleach could erase. I fought back angry tears as I surveyed the destruction of my life's work. "Don't worry, we'll get it cleaned up good as new," Marcus tried reassuring me, but the defeat in his voice was palpable. I shook my head vehemently. "Like hell we will. Those degenerates want to knock us down? Fine. But we're not going to just roll over." He opened his mouth to protest, but I shot him a look that stopped him cold. After over a decade together, Marcus knew that fire in my eyes meant I was operating on an entirely different level now. Within hours, news of the sabotage had spread like wildfire thanks to some strategically leaked photos. Declan and Elise may own half this town, but I could work the other half to my advantage. "You hear what those Abernathy pricks did to Celia's place?" one patron muttered, as the morning crowd trickled into Sweet Beans, the one remaining cafe in this pit. His buddy shook his head in disbelief. "Damn shame. Those two have had it out for the Barnes family for years." I allowed myself a tight smile from my earshot vantage point. Let the muttering begin. Soon it would be a deafening roar. The first strike was more psychological than physical. With my cafe out of commission, the Abernathys thought they could starve me out. Little did those fools know how deep my reserves actually went. The torrential rain of negative reviews and scathing exposés on their businesses started like a soft drizzle. A few here, a few there, gradually gaining momentum. Longtime family friends, other small business owners who'd fallen victim to Declan's bullying, everyone had their truth to share. By week's end, it was a Category 5 hurricane, slamming their pristine reputation. Those filthy slumlords at West Park Property Management are a public menace. Had my car keyed in their lot just for asking about their pricing. Avoid this place. The unhygienic conditions at Elise's nail salon are a biohazard. With each fresh salvo of negativity, Marcus would throw me that concerned, "Don't poke the bear" glance. But he didn't understand. This was merely the opening gambit. I had so much more devastation to unleash if those cretins didn't back off. Marcus was my next avenue of attack. I'd discovered his contract as an English teacher was up for renewal in 2 months. When he arrived home from school one evening looking ashen, I already knew. "They canned me, Celia." The board voted to note my contract for budgetary reasons. My blood boiled. Declan's poison had already infested the school system, turning Marcus into an enemy of the state for daring to foster free thought in his students' minds. In that moment, I was full of more blind rage than I'd ever experienced. How dare those depraved sociopaths jeopardize not just our home and business, but Marcus's passion and life's work? This was no longer just a fight for us. It was a fight for everyone they'd mercilessly tried to crush beneath their heels. "Get your resume together," I hissed, already plotting my counterstrike. "If they want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget." The cafe kitchen had become my war room. Tattered legal pads covered every surface, my scribbled notes and diagrams giving form to the intricate web I'd uncovered regarding Declan and Elise's misdeeds. Shady real estate deals, insider trading, bullying small business owners into bankruptcy so they could snatch up prime properties for pennies on the dollar. The depths of their depravity knew no bounds. But it was the thread connecting them to Mayor Woodbridge that made this personal. Ever since I was a kid, old Woodbridge had been as corrupt as they came, selling out our community to the highest bidder. Declan was his oldest crony, securing municipal contracts and manipulating zoning laws to consolidate their power. And right in the middle of it all was my stupid, gullible aunt, Lydia. Her real estate license had given them just enough plausible deniability to defraud so many families out of their homes and life savings. I seethed as I pored over the incriminating evidence, bank statements, emails, even audio recordings from sources too terrified to go public. All the pieces were coming together into an uglier picture than I could have imagined. The rusty squeak of the kitchen door snapped me out of my concentrated haze. Marcus stepped in tentatively, his eyes falling on the makeshift dossier with a mix of awe and concern. "Celia, what in the hell is all this?" I didn't even look up from the stack of papers in my hands. The key to bringing down Declan and Elise's house of cards, once and for all. His brow furrowed as he inched closer. "You've got to be careful here. If even half of what you're implying is true, these people are dangerous." A mirthless chuckle escaped my lips. "You're damn right they're dangerous. To our family, our friends, this entire community. That's why they need to be stopped, no matter what it takes." Marcus let out a weary sigh, bracing himself on the rusted metal counter across from my frenzied workspace. "I had a visit from Woodbridge's chief of staff today at the school. They made it excruciatingly clear that any attempt by me to challenge the board's decision would be inadvisable." White-hot rage flared within me at the implied threat. Those pathetic cowards think they can silence dissent through intimidation? They've underestimated how far I'm willing to go for justice. "Celia," his tone was gentle but firm, "I don't want to see you sacrificing who you are for some personal vendetta. Putting all of this together has already consumed you." I finally lifted my gaze, locking eyes with the man I loved more than life itself. "Don't you see, Marcus? This stopped being personal the second they threatened your livelihood. They want to break us, demoralize us into quiet submission like they've done with so many others." Standing abruptly, I began feverishly gathering the strewn papers into one masterfully curated pile. "Well, I have news for those twisted pricks. We're not going down without one hell of a fight. It's time to take the gloves off and fight fire with fire." Marcus looked like he wanted to protest further, but thought better of it. He knew once I got that look in my eye, it was best to just stand aside and let me incinerate anything standing in my path. As I started forming the game plan to dismantle Declan's empire, I felt more energized and purposeful than I had in years. Those sadistic bastards had awoken a remorseless, vengeful spirit within me. And by the time I was through, they'd be begging for mercy they'd never receive. Despite feeling like a lone warrior taking on Declan and Elise's empire of corruption, I slowly realized we weren't as isolated as they wanted us to believe. Little by little, the whispers from others who had suffered at their hands began surfacing. It started with a late-night knock at the cafe's rear entrance. I instinctively grabbed the baseball bat leaning against the wall before creaking the door open a sliver. "We're closed." I began brusquely before recognizing the tear-stained face on the other side. "Angela, what's going on?" She glanced over her shoulder nervously before slipping inside. Angela worked as a receptionist downtown, but her husband Mike had run a thriving plumbing business before. "It's Mike. He's been arrested for bogus charges," she blurted out between shaky breaths. "The police showed up at our home with guns drawn, claiming he was tied to a burglary ring." The color drained from her face as the words tumbled out. "We hadn't paid our full processing fee to Woodbridge's permitting office in months. Declan's goons made it clear this is what happens when we don't fall in line." White-hot rage boiled within me. Using the police as his own personal goon squad to shake down hard-working citizens? I should have known Declan's reach extended that far. "Don't worry. We're going to fight this," I assured Angela, squeezing her hand. "No more living in fear of those bastards." Word traveled fast once people realized I was waging an all-out assault against Declan and Elise's tyranny. More started reaching out through hushed messaging apps and back channels, all of them victims of relentless shakedowns, harassment, or worse. The elderly couple who had lost their family home to one of Declan's shady foreclosure schemes. The restaurant owner who refused to pay Elise's grease trap cleaning cartel, only to be shuttered by arduous inspections. Small business owners, residents, pretty much anyone who dared defy their criminal enterprise. One by one, the persecuted began congregating in the cafe's back room. My former office turned into a strategy headquarters. I pored over each heartbreaking account of abuse, carefully cataloging every injustice like a blood-stained tapestry depicting their sins. We've got to be careful here, Marcus cautioned, as the dense dossiers on Declan and Elise piled up. If they catch wind of what you're putting together, then they'll know we're not going to cower anymore. I cut him off sharply. These people have had their lives and livelihoods ruined, all for the high crime of defying the Abernathy faction's greed. I swept my arm across the assembled documents with grim determination. Well, the joyride stops here. We're going to hit them with everything we've got. No more holding back. A heavy silence hung over the dimly lit room as everyone took in the sheer scope of the undertaking. Marcus was right, of course. Going nuclear against Declan and Elise meant putting massive targets on our backs. But at this point, none of us had anything left to lose. What's the play, Celia? Hank, a retired cop who'd been driven out by Declan's cronyism, was the first to speak up. How do we dismantle these parasites once and for all? My gaze slowly scanned the solemn, determined faces of our ragtag brigade. Declan and Elise had gravely underestimated the blowback their cruelty would ultimately provoke. United, no longer isolated and afraid, we were more than a force to be reckoned with. We were a righteous, goddamn army. We burn it all to the ground, I replied, venom dripping from every word. Then we salt the earth and make sure nothing like this ever sprouts again. A grim murmur of assent rippled through the group. For too long, Declan and Elise's boot had been planted firmly on our necks, but not anymore. It was time to reclaim our dignity, by any means necessary. This was it, the moment we'd been meticulously planning and waiting for. The town hall meeting room was standing room only, bodies pressed together as the restless murmurs built to a dull roar. On the small stage, I took a steadying breath as Marcus gave my hand one final reassuring squeeze. Beside us stood Hank, Angela, and Mike, the Hendersons, a coalition of the persecuted who had been systematically crushed under Declan and Elise's heels. These were just the brave few who were willing to show their faces publicly. For every person here, there were dozens more who had shared their horror stories from the shadows, fearing retribution from the Abernathy cabal. No more. Tonight, we would drag their depravity into the disinfecting light, whether they liked it or not. Thank you all for coming, I began, raising my voice to be heard over the crowd's anxious chatter. My name is Celia Barnes, and this Portuguan of hard-working, upstanding citizens have been gravely wronged. I could feel the energy in the room intensify as all eyes turned towards the stage. This was our moment to shatter the fear that had gripped the town for far too long. For decades, Declan and Elise Abernathy have perpetrated a relentless campaign of exploitation, fraud, and cruelty, all in pursuit of consolidating wealth and power. The words tumbled out with building fury as I raised the thick dossier clutched in my hands. Orchestrating homes to be illegally seized, extorting fees from small businesses under threat of bureaucratic retribution, threatening violence against any who dare to speak out. I turned towards the line of victims beside me, each one standing tall and resolute. Every person you see here has been mercilessly targeted when they refused to be another cow led to the slaughter. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd as I began recounting, one by one, the graphic accounts of abuse my friends had faced. Angela's husband Mike beaten and framed, the Hendersons' home and life savings stripped away through legal trickery. With each horrific story, you could actually see the veil of fear lifting from people's eyes as their own simmering rage took hold. So tonight, we are going to do what the Abernathys and their ilk have depended on nobody having the courage to do. My voice rang out, trembling not with fear, but with a sense of empowerment. We are going to stand united and bring every single atrocity into the light. I turned to Hank with a nod. He stepped forward, punching a button on the projector remote to unveil a kaleidoscope of damning photos, documents, and evidence splashed across the big screen. Bank statements linking Declan to a myriad of financial crimes, emails explicitly tying them both to a pay-for-play scandal intended to defraud municipal contracts, confirmed incidents of bribery, harassment, assault, all meticulously sourced and fact-checked. The town hall had become eerily silent as the insidious reality none had dared confront was laid bare. Finally, one voice pierced through the uneasy hush. "My boy got busted for a possession charge 2 years ago," a gruff man called out. Elise sat on the jury and made sure he got railroaded into a draconian sentence. As if a dam had burst, others began shouting out their own miseries in a cathartic purge. Their property company has been massively overcharging rent for years. My daughter lost her job at City Hall for refusing to dig up personal files on Declan's enemies. I stood back, allowing the outrage to crest like a roiling tsunami. The harder Declan and Elise had squeezed, the more pressure had built behind the flimsy facade of their crumbling empire. And tonight, the floodgates blew open in a torrent of righteous fury. Nobody would ever be intimidated into silence again. The streets outside were already teeming with reporters and news vans as words of our insurrection spread like wildfire. Emboldened, empowered, we marched outside to a thunderous roar of acclaim. If Declan and Elise wanted war after such a brazen attempt to steal our home, they had just been given a battle unlike anything they could have ever imagined. The media firestorm was like a 5-alarm blaze Declan and Elise didn't see coming. For years, their corruption had been an open secret, the kind of thing everyone knew about but felt powerless to stop. Not anymore. We had ripped that scab right off, and now the whole world could see the pustulating evil festering beneath. Woodbridge's police force tried downplaying it at first, dismissing the allegations as unsubstantiated rumors. But we were ready, drowning their feeble spin under a tidal wave of evidence too overwhelming to be ignored. It was almost impressive seeing Declan pivot into full damage control mode. He trotted out a small army of suits to desperately try containing the conflagration. There were lawsuits and gag orders, desperate attempts to silence our uprising through legal intimidation, as if pieces of paper could smother the justifiable rage now burning across the entire town. "The lies and hysterics have to stop," Declan growled into every available microphone and camera lens. "My family has done nothing but serve the citizens of this community through ethical leadership and investment." Watching his blatant lies from the cafe's rickety old TV made my blood boil. Ethical? Is that what they called terrorizing grandparents out of their homes? Forcing employees to cook the books with threats of violence? "We need to respond," I told the group assembled around me in hushed tones. "This snake isn't just going to slither away quietly." Hank grunted in agreement. "He's a bully, always has been. Only way bullies learn is when someone finally punches them square in the mouth." A chilling hush fell over the group as we digested those words. There were some lines you couldn't uncross, some fights where cooler heads had to prevail. I ran my hands through my tangled hair, feeling bone-weary. "Hank's right. It's time for a knockout blow. Put these bastards down once and for all." So we hit them with everything. Literally. The vintage video projector hummed to life, bathing the blank wall of the vacant community center in flickering light. A hushed thrill filled the air as citizens trickled in, gathering around the impromptu screening room with rapt anticipation. Thank you all for coming. I stood below the projection screen, eyes roaming over the expectant faces. For far too long, an insidious force has preyed upon those they were entrusted to serve and protect. A hiss of anger rippled through the crowd. They knew where this was headed. Tonight, the victims get to confront the accused directly, to stare into the darkness in search of a shred of light or humanity. I could feel the weight of the moment growing heavier. Please join me in welcoming Declan and Elise Abernathy. The audible gasps were like a tidal wave as two spotlights cut through the shadows, bathing the stunned faces of my adversaries in brilliant illumination. You could see the color drain from Elise's cheeks as she nervously clutched Declan's arm. In the end, it had been almost too easy luring them to this secret meeting under the pretense of negotiating a truce. Declan's insatiable hubris wouldn't allow him to pass up an opportunity to gloat. He puffed out his chest, squaring up under the harsh spotlights with a thin sneer. "Whatever sad publicity stunt this is supposed to, shut your lying mouth." A booming voice cut him off from the crowd. One by one, my co-conspirators began stepping forward into the light. Angela, Mike, with his arm still in a sling, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. The stories of their suffering flickered to life on the projector screen behind them. Declan's mask of smug indifference began to crack as more and more victims materialized from the darkness, a united front of the persecuted. His bogus denials and legalese meant nothing in the face of their collective pain. I stepped forward, squaring off with the monster, who had tried to take everything from me and those I loved. Gone was the rage, the vitriol that had fueled me until this point. In its place was an icy, focused resolution. Your reign of terror ends tonight, Declan. No more fear, no more hiding. I saw his hand start to tremble as I leaned in close. We're going to dismantle every rotten criminal foundation you've spent decades building. Your corruption finally sees the light. A smile ghosted across my lips as his eyes finally widened with panic. And it's one you won't be able to escape. The air was electric with celebration as I surveyed the scene unfolding in my backyard. Marcus squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and relief. Just a few months ago, this warm gathering of friends and loved ones seemed an impossible dream. Declan and Elise's reign of terror had cast a pall over our community for far too long. But that darkness had finally lifted, thanks to the courage and unity that had been forged in the fire of adversity. Slowly but surely, the dominoes began toppling after we dragged their depravity into the light. First came Woodbridge's political demise, then law enforcement circling like sharks to the scent of widespread corruption. Declan and Elise put up a desperate fight, of course. They hurled lawsuit after lawsuit, conjuring blustering legalese in futile attempts to cling to their ill-gotten empire. But the damning weight of evidence was simply too immense to be swept under the rug any longer. I couldn't help but smile as I recalled the day Declan had finally been led away in handcuffs. The once arrogant smirk twisted into impotent fury as the world bore witness to his unraveling. "You'll regret this, you psychotic bitch!" he had snarled at me through a haze of camera flashes. "We had everything, and you just couldn't leave well enough alone." For just a moment, a sliver of doubt had crept into the back of my mind. Had I gone too far in my quest to cleanse our city of their poison? Did I overstep by ensuring their empire crumbled to dust beneath their feet? Then I'd watched as Elise frantically tried to flee in her glossy sports car, only to find the tires had been slashed. Admittedly, an indulgent touch of poetic justice on my part. The terrified realization in her eyes that her life of pompous luxury had disintegrated into an object of scorn. Any shred of remorse evaporated as I drank in the delicious karma. In the weeks that followed, the entire rotten infrastructure upholding Declan and Elise's iron grip began to implode. Corrupt city officials and police were swept out, facing lengthy jail sentences. Their real estate holdings and assets were seized as the bankruptcy trustee picked apart the shattered remains. Most deliciously of all, the Aunt Lydia, who had turned her back on family to cast her lot with those predators, was cast out in disgrace, left to confront the consequences of her choices alone. I felt a small pang of regret for the woman who had once showered me with affection during those rare moments of stability in my childhood. But the sting faded as quickly as it came. She had made her selfish bed, after all. As twilight faded into night, the ebb and flow of animated chatter surrounded me like a warm cocoon. Friends and allies from our uprising, swapping tales of perseverance and sharing an immense sense of relief that the nightmare was finally over. Hank patted me on the back with his trademark grunt of approval. "Never doubted you for a second, Celia. You're a damn tough woman getting this done." The Hendersons squeezed my hand, tears in their eyes as they choked back their gratitude. I simply smiled. No words were necessary. The cafe was already being restored to its former glory, poised to reclaim its mantle as a vibrant community hub. In the days ahead, I had grand plans to pay forward our unexpected windfall from Declan's shattered assets. Civic improvement initiatives, small business loans, and community outreach were just the beginning. And for Marcus, a hard-earned new role spearheading the school district's ethics overhaul, ensuring no teacher would ever again face persecution for inspiring curious young minds. As the night's revelries drifted towards a warm closure, I found myself alone in the kitchen doorway, surveying the gathering with a profound sense of peace. The long, bitter struggle had bound us all as a tribe, facing down the unimaginable, only to emerge vindicated and renewed. Marcus looped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You did it, baby. You were the hero this city needed to finally break that cycle." I turned to face him, eyes shimmering with joyful tears. We did it, together. Our lips met in a tender, passionate embrace, the future brimming with hope and possibility. The demons had been purged, the lanterns extinguished. In their place shone a blazing torch lighting our path forward, toward new dreams, new triumphs, and a community reclaiming its sacred soul.